Let's get started on Chapter 12, Wide Area Network Essentials. In this chapter, we will discuss LAN versus WAN, the Internet, methods of accessing the Internet, such as modem, DSL, cable, and leased line, using a router, Internet protocols, packet switching, RAS, remote access server, VPN, virtual private network, and cloud computing. Let's start out with the difference between a LAN and a WAN. Well, I think everybody is comfortable with what a LAN is. It is a local area network. And this is a very simple single segment LAN. This is a multi-segment LAN, and this is a diagram of the Catonsville campus of the Community College of Baltimore County. A LAN is one geographic area, typically not more than 2 miles across from one end to the other. This would be a local area network. Now, let's discuss a wide area network. Whereas on a local area network, the nodes are workstations and servers. In a wide area network, the nodes are internet sites. A wide area network connects sites over a great distance. What's the difference between a WAN and the Internet? Because the Internet is a wide area network. Well, you could have a private wide area network. For example, the Bank of America, on all of their tall buildings, they have microwave towers, and that connects all their buildings together across the country. And that's a wide area network, but it's a private wide area network used only by the Bank of America. The Internet is also a wide area network, but the Internet is a wide area network that connects networks across the country all over the globe. If we look at the Webster's Dictionary definition of the Internet, we see that the Internet is an electronic communications network that connects computer networks. So in other words, it is a network of networks around the world. Different methods of accessing the Internet, either from a small office, home office, or from a larger organization. Page 535 discusses what a modem is, and I know we talked about that earlier. A modem allows your computer to connect to the telephone jack in the wall so we can connect to other computers using the telephone line. A modem takes a digital signal, which is what computers use, and it converts it to an analog signal. Why does it convert from digital to analog? That's because telephone lines, meaning POTS, page 537, the plain old telephone system uses an analog signal. Computers use digital signals. The phone wires, the plain old telephone system uses analog signal, and the purpose of the modem is to convert the digital to the analog. The signal goes across the telephone wires, arrives at the other end, and then the analog signal is converted to a digital signal by the modem, and then the modem delivers the signal to the computer at the other end. People don't really use modems much anymore. Most people are using broadband internet access. The advantage of a modem, even though it's slow, is you can make a connection anywhere there is a telephone line. Now let's look at broadband access. Broadband cable is where you have a cable TV coaxial connection coming into your house that's also used to carry network traffic. You have a cable TV coaxial cable coming into your house which connects to the cable modem, and it could connect to a single computer. But most likely that cable modem would connect to a router and a switch, and that would allow many computers to access the same broadband cable connection. Another method of connection is DSL. DSL stands for Digital Subscriber Line, and DSL is where a digital signal comes in on the telephone wires and then connects to a DSL modem, which then connects to the computer. If you wanted, you could have only a single computer hooked up to the DSL line, but usually many computers share that single DSL line. Here's an example of a small office, home office, using both DSL and Wi-Fi. Now, don't get DSL and Wi-Fi mixed up because they're really different things. Wi-Fi is a wireless technology that allows wireless laptops to connect to a wireless access point, to a wireless router. That's Wi-Fi. And then DSL is the connection that goes from the DSL modem and connects us to the internet. This is a very common setup that we see here. Wireless laptops connect to a wireless router which connects to a DSL or a cable modem. So methods of accessing the internet includes using a modem or cable modem or a DSL, and we've discussed that you also might use a satellite. If you live in a remote area such as northern Michigan where there is no DSL, then you can use satellite to connect to the internet. And of course you can use a cell phone connection such as 4G to connect to the internet, and that's what they call WiMAX when it's connected up to a SOHO, small office, home office. Now let's look at methods of connecting to the internet for a large organization. The Community College of Baltimore County DSL line is not going to cut it. Typically, you would use a leased line. A leased line gives us much, much greater capacity. For example, our Catonsville campus has a leased line connection to the Verizon central office, and we have another leased line that goes to Essex. A leased line gives you much greater bandwidth. T1 provides 1.5 megabits per second, and it used to be a big deal because we used to consider 1.5 megabits per second fast. T3 provides 44 megabits per second. OC, which stands for optical carrier, it uses fiber optic, can provide 51 megabits per second, and OC2 can provide 155 megabits per second. At CCBC Catonsville, we have two OC2 lines. Gives us a total of 310 megabits per second for our Catonsville campus. Now let's look at legacy WAN technologies. Legacy means it's old. They don't use it anymore. ISDN, Integrated Services Digital Network, uses phone lines to make connections over the internet. It was fast at the time, 10 megabits per second, but that's not configured fast right now. X.25 and frame relay would both run at 1.5 megabits per second. Used to be considered fast, but ISDN, X.25, frame relay are considered legacy WAN technologies. What most organizations are using these days, and this is what we use at the Community College of Baltimore County, is Comcast Business Class Internet. Notice we get internet speeds up to 64 times faster than a T1. So if a T1 is 1.5 megabits per second, we're talking about greater than 90 megabits per second. Comcast Business Class, and of course Verizon has the same thing. When you are talking about one of these leased lines, it is a significantly higher cost. DSL is what? 30, maybe 50 bucks a month, but when you're talking about one of these leased lines, you're paying $1,000 to $2,000 for each one of these leased lines, and we have two of them at each campus. The internet connection. The way for a local area network to connect to the internet is by way of the router. The router is our internet connection. This is a diagram of the CCBC Catonsville campus, and we have a router in the middle of the campus. And the router is used to hook all of our local area networks together, and that's called LAN to LAN routing. And it connects everybody to the internet, and that is called LAN to WAN routing. Here at CCBC, we use a commercial router. We use a big old Cisco router. However, in a small office, home office, many organizations use small wireless routers, which do not have as much of a capability, but essentially they perform the same job. And that job of the router, whether it's a big Cisco router or a little wireless router, is to connect the local area network to the internet. Now let's discuss internet protocols, and we have discussed these protocols throughout the class. And another way to discuss what these protocols are and what they're for is to answer the question, what can you do on the internet? And each one of these protocols has a separate function. Now, everybody knows what the hypertext transfer protocol is. It's for use for surfing the web. You use the hypertext transfer protocol to access web pages. If you access the CCBC web page, you can log on and you can take an online class, or you can register for classes. You can use the hypertext transfer protocol to go to Google. And what can you do after you go to Google? Well, you can do lots of different things. You can do e-commerce, such as going to Amazon.com and buying something. But e-commerce isn't always buying things. It could be going to the Motor Vehicle Administration to update your car registration or your driver's license. E-commerce could mean simply information. You might go to a website simply to get information, just to see the time that a movie starts. Or you might go to a website to do online shopping. B2B stands for business to business, and that's where a business purchases something from another business using the World Wide Web. You could do your car registration over the net. You could do online college registration. You could take online classes, and of course, everybody knows what Facebook is. But the entire internet is not limited to the World Wide Web. SMTP, the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, allows us to communicate with each other. The Simple Mail Transfer Protocol allows us to send email to each other, to our coworkers, to our customers, to our friends. Telnet we've discussed before. Telnet is a program that allows us to remotely log on to a remote computer and run programs on that computer as if we were standing at that computer. If I go to my workstation and I type Telnet followed by the computer that I want to connect to, I will Telnet and connect to that remote computer. And if I wanted to edit the payroll database file, which is on that remote computer, I could edit the payroll database file, and I could edit programs on that computer just as if I were standing at that computer. If I were to use Telnet and I were to type format space C:, I would not be formatting the hard disk on my own local computer. I would be formatting the hard disk on the remote computer. Telnet allows you to run programs on remote computers. Let's not confuse that with the file transfer protocol. The file transfer protocol is to transfer files. It's to copy files across the internet from one computer to the next. If I go to the command prompt and I type FTP followed by an IP address, it allows me to connect to another computer. If I tell you I am going to FTP a file to you, it means I am going to copy the file to you. I use FTP to copy a file to the hard disk of a remote server or copy a file from the hard disk of the remote server. Notice, FTP is not Telnet. Telnet allows you to run programs on the CPU of the remote server, but not FTP. FTP is used just to copy files, to transfer files to the hard disk of another computer or from the hard disk of another computer. So if I tell you I am going to FTP a file to you, it's just another way of saying I am going to transfer or copy a file across the internet. If we look at the FTP help screen, to copy a file, actually you don't use the copy command. To copy a file to another computer, you use the put command. And to copy a file from another computer, you use the get command. Internet protocols include HTTP for surfing the internet, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol for sending email, Telnet for running programs on other computers, and FTP for transferring files. Let's discuss packet switching. Now, I know we discussed it on page 8, but we get it again on page 541. So if you, the user, are going to send a message such as "Have a nice day" from your computer over the internet to another computer, well, you as the user don't know it, but the TCP/IP protocol takes that message and chops it up into smaller packets. And then it sends those packets across the internet, and those packets may take different paths. And the advantage of packets taking different paths, it is a faster way to transfer data than if all the packets take the exact same path. These packets are transferred from one router to the next router to the next router until they finally reach the computer at the other end, whereby they are reassembled and the message is delivered to the user at the other end. And of course, the user at the other end never even knew that these packets, that this message was chopped up into packets. Packet switching is where a message is chopped up into packets and sent across the internet. It's sent from router to router to router. Now here's something confusing here. Packet switching is done by routers, not by switches. Packet switching is done by routers, not by switches. Now let's turn to page 549, Remote Access Networking. They also call this RAS, and it's also called dial-up networking, and we will also look at VPN, Virtual Private Networking. If I am at my computer at home and I want to connect to one of the servers at work and I have a modem, what we would not do at work would be to hook a modem to every single server at work, because there are a lot of servers at work. We would get one server, which is called the RAS server, Remote Access Server, that has a whole bank of modems. And if anybody wants to connect to this organization, they have to go through the RAS server, and then they can go through the network to access other servers. So if I'm at my workstation, I use a modem to connect using the telephone lines to the modem on the RAS server at work. I go through the RAS server, and this allows me to access the other servers at work. This is called dial-up networking because we're using the old phone lines. Of course, most people aren't using the old phone lines these days. Most people are using broadband access. So here's how we can do the same thing using broadband access. With broadband access, you would have a cable modem which connects to your internet service provider, and of course your employer would have a RAS server which was not connected to modems but connected to their internet service providers, and of course the internet connects all internet service providers to all internet service providers. So then I, as a user, can go over the internet through the RAS server and access any servers in my organization that I want to access. Here's the problem. There's a security risk of eavesdropping. The internet is a public network, and a bad guy with a protocol analyzer could potentially tap into the internet and steal confidential information, credit card numbers, passwords, or confidential employee information. So the solution is we encrypt the data before it goes over the internet. It's encrypted from workstation over the internet, and it's sent over the internet encrypted. If it's encrypted, then a bad guy with a protocol analyzer can't make any sense of it. And they call this a virtual private network. Virtual private network just means the data is encrypted before it goes over the internet. Why do they call it a virtual private network? Well, it's not really a private network. The internet is a public network. But since the data is encrypted, you can send private data over a VPN connection because it's encrypted. So it allows to send private data over a public internet. VPN, virtual private network. A virtual private network is where you have a RAS server and RAS clients. And the RAS client, remote access server, could use a modem or broadband cable or DSL. When we encrypt the data, then that connection is called a virtual private network. Now let's turn to page 555 and discuss cloud computing. Cloud computing means computing across the internet. The internet is the cloud. So let's look at a couple different examples of cloud computing. If we look at Microsoft's web page and they discuss why you would use cloud computing, the description says, you now have the power to enable your people to work from virtually anywhere, anytime, on any device. To work from virtually anywhere. So let's look at 6 different examples of cloud computing. Cloud server, SharePoint, Google Docs, Office 365, Azure, and application virtualization. Now, we've already discussed what a cloud server is. A cloud server is a server which can be accessed from the internet. So if you're at Starbucks, you can save the data up to the cloud server. And then if you go to work, you can still access the files by pulling them off the cloud server. And if you go home, you can still access the files because they are centrally stored on the cloud server. A cloud server could also be used for collaboration. You could have somebody in New York and somebody in Miami and somebody in San Francisco all working on the same project and all storing their data on one server, on one cloud server. This allows for collaboration, which, as you know, means people working together. Microsoft Office SharePoint is a piece of software that allows for collaboration. Notice how many times you see the word collaboration on this website. Microsoft SharePoint is a piece of software which you install on a web server. And the purpose is to allow many people to access common files so they can collaborate. Google Docs. Many of you are familiar with Google Docs. If you use Google Docs, what you can do is you can save files up to the Google Docs server. And then other people, your coworkers or friends, can access those files which are saved on the Google Docs server. Microsoft Office 365. 365 allows us to work from virtually anywhere and on almost any device. Now, when we looked at Google Docs, we are primarily talking about saving files centrally to the server. But when we talk about Microsoft Office 365, what we have centrally located there is program files, is application files. And if you want to use Microsoft Office 365, you do not need to get the installed DVD and plug it into your computer. What you do is you connect to Microsoft's website, type in your credit card number, and then you can install Microsoft Office over the wire to your own computer, and then you can store files up on the Office 365 server as well. With Office 365, the program files are stored centrally on the server, and you can download them and install them on your workstation. The point is you don't need to get a hold of a DVD just to do an install. And if you go to another workstation that does not have Office 365, you can install it on that workstation as well. Now let's discuss Windows Azure. Everybody knows what a web page is. A web page allows us to advertise our product. And a web page is typically stored on a web server. And that web server could be located at your organization. Here at the Community College of Baltimore County, our web server is in our data center, and we take care of our web server because we have a full-time professional staff. But suppose you had a small business, like a jewelry store or a taxi company, you would not really have the knowledge or the inclination to manage your own physical web server. So what you do is you put your website up on a cloud server. And that is what Windows Azure is. It is a cloud server. What you can do is you can put your website up on the cloud server. Why would you do that? Well, so you wouldn't have to maintain it. It's Microsoft's obligation to keep that server up and running. You put the website, you put the web page up on that cloud server, and when users access it, they don't know whether or not the web page is at your physical site or if the web page is located up on the Azure server. Now let's look at application virtualization. That is to say, running programs on the cloud server. Now we have already talked about simply saving files to a cloud server, simply saving files to the hard disk on the cloud server, and that's one thing. But with application virtualization, you are running programs on the CPU of the cloud server. You're not simply saving files to the hard disk. You're actually running programs on the CPU of the cloud server. A perfect example of that is VMware Horizontal Workspace. VMware Horizon Workspace provides an easy way to access apps and files on any device while enabling IT to centrally deliver, manage, and secure these assets. Horizon Workspace allows us to implement application virtualization. And with application virtualization, we're actually running programs on the cloud server. Here is a commercial example of application virtualization and cloud computing. TurboTax. TurboTax is a program that helps you calculate your taxes. With TurboTax, you enter how much you made and how much taxes that you paid and your exemption and your withholding, and it calculates your tax for you. And there are two ways of running TurboTax. The old way is where you purchase the DVD and you install TurboTax on your PC. But the new way is to use application virtualization. What you do is you connect to the TurboTax web server and then you run the TurboTax program on that web server, on that cloud server. That way you never have to install the application on your individual computer. And it kind of makes sense because how many times per year do you do your taxes? Once. So why would you want to install an application on your computer if you're only going to use it once? Typically, the preferred method is to use application virtualization so you're running the programs on the cloud server. Common uses of cloud computing. One common use of cloud computing is to simply save files to the cloud server. But another use is to run programs on the cloud server, and that's called application virtualization. For communications, we can use email, and in order to do e-commerce, we can use the World Wide Web and the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Cloud computing includes cloud servers, Windows SharePoint, Google Docs, Office 365, Windows Azure, and application virtualization, including VMware Horizon Workspace. Chapter 12, Summary. In this chapter, we discussed LAN versus WAN, the Internet, methods of accessing the Internet, including modem, DSL, cable, and leased line, router, Internet protocols, packet switching, remote access server or dial-in networking, VPN, virtual private network, and cloud computing. And this concludes Chapter 12. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.